pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Stephen Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, giving another episode of the Wildlife for Pest Geek podcast. Well, thank you for listening. Hey, today I wanted to talk a little about the importance of note-taking and how you can organize your notes so that you have a continuous resource that you can build and then refer back to. One of the things that pest control operators and even some wildlife control operators have to do is they have to go through continuing training in order to maintain their license, or they go to training just to improve their quality of their professionalism. One of the challenges, of course, is you're inundated with so much information. How are you able to process that information? And one of the things that I find troubling as an educator and someone who's travels around and giving instruction is how often people are sitting in the audience and they're learning and sometimes they're attentive, but they don't take notes. And it always strikes me as a little odd if I think about it for a while, and that's, why aren't people taking notes? And it's because we believe that everything's Googleable. We think that every answer to life's problems can be answered by Google. And Google is a very powerful search engine to be sure, but the reality is that Google gives you information, but it doesn't give you a filtered information. And by that I mean it doesn't do a good job providing you context. So if you need to know how many people are in the United States today, Google's a great place to go. It's just sort of a brute fact. But if you're trying to figure out whether you should use a particular pesticide for someone in an allergic situation or a high-risk situation, that becomes much more difficult for you to extract with a couple clicks on your computer or your cell phone. And what we're missing is when we're going to training, a lot of times the contextual information that we get from a quality training course that you're going to needs to be captured so that you can refer back to it if you're training a new colleague, if it's an obscure issue that you don't normally deal with, so that you have that information sourced somewhere. But there's also another reason, not just historical, but some of the research seems to suggest that taking the time to write down notes actually helps embed that information deeper into your consciousness and into your memory. One research project that I've heard about it tried to compare students that took handwritten notes and compared it with those who took computer-typed notes. If you go to colleges today, they're often filled with students who are typing up their notes. And part of that is because typing is so much faster than handwriting. And what they found, if my remembering recollections, because I didn't read that particular article, I was looking at a post from someone who looks at learning, is that they found that students that were handwriting down their notes actually had better comprehension and better retention than students who were typing things down. And I know just anecdotally in my own life, that's certainly been true. When I'm typing something, I don't necessarily have that same engagement. And it seems to be that there's a relationship with the neural networks of your hand moving across the page, and the amount of effort involved to do that embeds information better into your system. So enough about that. The reality is that you need to be taking notes when you go to your training events. If for nothing more, even if you never look at your notes again, is that it helps hone your mind and hone your attention so that you're actually grasping more information out of it. And I know people say, oh, I just want to get the PowerPoints and it's too much work to take notes. And the reality is it's not. You do get better as you work at it. It actually helps improve your mind. And one of the things that we want to do as professionals in the pest geek world is that we want to get that geek factor, realizing that we're not just simply animal killers or bug killers, that we're bringing more to the table than that. And sometimes we're not able to do that because we're not fully engaged in the training that's required by our various state agencies around the country. And that's something I hope listeners to our podcast are going to try to correct, and that you start a note-taking system that's going to be worthy of the fine industry that you've decided to become part of. So what is a system that you can use? So my first recommendation is, if you have a system, keep on with it. So I'm going to tell you what my system is, and hopefully it helps those of you who don't have a system, that maybe this is something that can be useful for you. And I've tried to make it a little less taxing. And people ask me sometimes, do you refer back to your notes? And my answer is yes, I actually do. It's not regular, but I sometimes I do writing, and I'm like, I need an idea for another article, and I'll refer back through my notes. It's like, that's pretty interesting. Or if I'm writing a piece, publication for the state agency I work for, and I'm like, I will review my notes and say, is there I remember a guy talking about this, and he had this particular tip. And I'm then able to present that material to a much wider audience and save not only animal suffering, but improve control and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of advantages in doing this. So how do I do it? Well, first thing I do is I've used in the past moleskin notebooks. And if you're familiar with moleskin, these are bound notebooks. They're black. They have a rubber, not a rubber band, but they have a band that fits over them. They're quite nice. They can be ruled. Some of them are plain. Some of them are graph papered. But they have sort of a hard-bound cover, sort of a stiff cardboard, and they lay fairly flat. And they're about 8.5. They're about 8 inches tall, 5.5 inches wide. So they're kind of nice, handy, and they look great on the shelf. All right, and so I've used these. In fact, I think I'm on book number 5 right now with my notes, and I've been doing this for years. When I've gone to various trainings, I take one of my books along and just use it to take notes. And so I've used that. Now I'm starting to move over toward the tool system. That's TUL, and there's usually a long accent on the U, so it's tool, TUL system. You can go to any of your stationery stores. And basically what it is, it uses rings to hold the paper in your notebook, and this allows you to then move pages around within your notebook. And I'm moving towards that because I want to be able to put all of my commensal rodent information together and my bird information together, rather than having to cross-index across my books. But, so that's what I've had to do before. And so I'm starting to move towards the tool system now. So when you get your notebook, and you don't have to buy a moleskin, you can certainly buy, a 3-ring notebook or, a spiral-bound notebook or whatever it is, but you want something ideally that can have a spine on it so that you have an ability to put it on your shelf and know that those are your notes. So when you get your book, your notebook, the first thing you want to do is put your name and phone number and contact information in so that people can, if you lose it, people can get it back to you. Number 2, the next thing you want to do is leave the first few pages aside for your table of contents. This is going to allow you to review your notes quickly rather than flipping through every single page in your notebook. And so you basically, each line, you're going to put a number 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to number all your lines because that's going to then associate it with a different page of your notebook. So once you have your table of contents divvied out, and so with my notebooks here with Moleskin, is the numbers go up to almost what's this one? Almost 240 pages, almost 250 pages. And so I will number them and then use the first few pages of the notebook as my table of contents. This way, when I'm taking notes, I can then go back to my table of contents and say, okay, on page 154 through 156, it's birds or pigeons or geese or whatever. So if you're doing more insects, it would be, pharaoh ants or odorous house ants or the brown, whatever the case may be. In that way, you can then look at your table of contents quickly and be able to go immediately to that part without having to flip through the whole book. The next thing that you want to do is when you're listening to someone speak, each time you have a new speaker, you will write down the title of the talk at the top of the page, followed by the speaker's name, followed by the date that you heard the talk, and the location where you heard the talk. So it'd be city and state. Now, why is that? Because you never know that there may be a time when you're writing an article, and maybe it's a little bit more academic article, that you are then able to say, I heard this at such and such a time, in such and such a place. And so you're able to reference your source. And that can be important down the road. I tend to have a little bit more academic leaning, and it's important to be able to verify where you heard something in terms of your training. It also is important to give credit to where you learned that from. There's a lot of theft sometimes within wildlife control. I can't speak so much to the pest control world, where guys will treat information as if they've discovered it themselves, rather than acknowledging the person that they learned it from. And, and sometimes it's innocent. You don't have time to necessarily reference everyone, or you forget. But it's sometimes, even if it's not yours, to be able to say, hey, I learned this from such and such. Or this isn't my information. I've learned this somewhere. And so at least you're not, grandizing yourself, because there's a lot of ego in this industry. And I would suspect the same thing is true for the pest control industry. So let's review again. You want to get a good notebook. You want to put a table of contents in it. You want to be sure that you label each talk at the top of the page. Start with a brand new page with a new speaker. Give their name, give the title of the talk, give the location and date. And if you wanted to, you could say how long was the talk. Typically, things are going to be an hour. And then basically, that's it. Take your notes. Learn how to take some notes. Get some of those points down. Make drawings on there. Write down facts that are going to be important for you. Think about what's going to be important for you to train a new worker. Or maybe there's an idea on identification that's going to be critical to you. Maybe there's a formulation or a technique for spraying a pesticide or setting a trap or taking bait or whatever the case may be. And what you'll find is over time, you're going to have these series of notebooks, and then if you really want to take it up a notch, you're going to then go to the table of contents. You're going to label your notebooks on the spine. Like what I do is I say wildlife damage book number 3, wildlife damage book number 4. These are how I label my notebooks. Because then I will have a topic in one book that'll talk about pigeons, let's say it's volume 4, page 158, and then I may have another topic on pigeons in book number 3, page 101. And so sometimes I'll go through the effort of cross-referencing those two articles so that if I'm ever needed to do some research on pigeon control, if I go to book 3, the table of contents will also tell me to look at book 4 because there's another article over there. Now, obviously, that takes up more work, and a lot of people aren't going to do that. But again, it depends on what kind of professional do you want to be. And the fact is, a lot of anecdotal information is not going to be found on Google. There's a lot of tips that someone will tell you when they're talking to you, but it's nowhere to be found on Google. It won't be found in a publication. It won't be found in a journal article. You're not going to find it. So if you're not writing it down, you're not going to have it. The other advantage of your notebook is that if you have that person who spoke and you get their contact information, now you can then maybe call that person or write them an email and try to follow up and say, hey, I heard you speak on this subject. I was in Orlando or I was in Missoula or whatever the case may be, and I heard you talk at this time, appreciated it. I had a follow-up question about it. I have something to follow up. And that can be very gratifying for a speaker. It's like, someone actually remembered me talking. Having spoken a lot, I can tell you that part of what we're doing isn't always for the money. Sometimes it's simply for the ego, and it's the reality of it. They like getting stroked too. We like someone telling us that we made their day and we helped move them forward, helped them make more money, helped save them money, whatever the case may be. That's gratifying. If we didn't, educators thrive off of seeing other people succeed, and so that's what motivates us. So I hope that that you will adopt this notebook perspective, and this tool that you can use that will improve your learning and will be a resource that you will value as you continue to grow within your career. My name is Stephen Van Tassel with Wildlife Control Consultant, giving you the wildlife talk here on Pest Geek Podcast. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.